Hello Orchid friends, how are you? Welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time watching my video, my channel is all about orchids. From what orchids I have, how I grow them, my thoughts on certain orchid topics, to what orchids in my collection are blooming, etc. So if you want to follow along my orchid hobby adventure, please consider subscribing to my channel and turn on the notification. Today in this video, we're going to look at one of my 4 Tolumnia orchids. I have 4 total, and this one is called Tolumnia Flyer Fantastic. This is one of the first 2 Tolumnia orchids that I purchased while I was living in New York, and until just now that it's giving me its first bloom ever. So I'm very excited to share this with you. So let's take a look at the story behind this orchid. So back in 2018, around mid-December, I discovered that it was finally giving out a spike. So I was very excited. I was over the moon about it because this orchid was pretty stressed out when I was in New York because I didn't know how to take care of it. Luckily, the newest fan grew pretty big after I moved to the southern portion of the United States, and by year-end 2018 you could already tell that the spike was elongating, and pretty much by mid-January 2019 all the buds had already been formed. So I think there were a total of 9 buds, and by 2019 end of January you can tell that all the buds were developing very nicely, no bud blast. And speaking of bud blast, I noticed that Tolumnia doesn't really have this kind of problem. At least in my care, how I do it, it just doesn't happen. But let me know if you have any bud blast problem with Tolumnias, because for all my Tolumnias, they seem to always come in full bloom. And here's a clip, speaking of full bloom. This orchid is really interesting for a few reasons. Number one is that I noticed that the color changes. At first, when the flower first opened, it is much more red. And then it gradually became more pink. So at first I thought it just looked so red velvet, like, very velvety. And then also the space between each flower, or when it was in buds, I was thinking, gosh, the space between each bud was very wide compared to my other Tolumnia blooms, my Red Sun or my Snow White. They're more kind of clustered together, but this one is more, spread out on the spike. And I think there's a good reason for it. As you can see here, the flowers are actually much bigger, so maybe that's why it knew that it had to grew its buds farther apart in order to have enough room for the flowers. Now, this portion of the video is to give you a sense of how the orchid is doing in terms of its root system. As you can see, it's pretty healthy, and the way that I'm doing this orchid, the way I'm growing this orchid, is it's a hybrid between traditional media versus semi-hydro, because when I leave some water at the bottom of this 8-ounce cup, then it's kind of a semi-hydro approach. But if the weather is colder, or there is just, too much humidity, that kind of thing, then I can decide, okay, maybe I don't want to have water at the bottom. Then that way it just becomes a traditional growing method. And also, if you look at the nodes along the spike, we may potentially have secondary spikes. We'll have a couple more photos later in this video to show you why I think we may have secondary spikes coming out. So here are some photos from when this flower spike was still developing or maturing its buds. So I noticed that the distance between buds was pretty far apart, and when the first 2 flowers opened I realized that I was thinking to myself that, gosh, this orchid looks, that the flowers looks pretty red. It's that dark red / burgundy color that makes me think that this orchid is looking very velvety. But as time went by, the skirt area, the lip area gradually became more and more pink. And here you see that the sepal on the back of the flower is very interesting. It's a lot longer than the two other Tolumnias I have, and I think in a couple more frames you're gonna see a comparison, but when that comes on I'll mention it again. But overall, I'm really happy with this orchid because it's first flowering ever and it's already giving me 9 flowers, so I'm pretty happy about its performance this year. And here is a closer look at the nodes, and I think that we may have 2 secondary spikes coming out from the main spike, so hopefully that will be the case, so that way in the near future we will have more flowers to come. Okay, and here's a close-up at the sepal on the back of the flower. So, and then here's the red sun. It's a lot shorter, right? And then you also see here is the snow white. Also, the sepal on the back of the flower is a lot shorter and smaller. So this orchid is kind of interesting because it just has that very long sepal on the back, and it just it reminds me of a tuxedo, right? A tuxedo with that long tail. Very interesting. And here you see the newest fan is very, very, very succulent-like. And it's also the biggest fan of all, so I think this orchid is definitely happy and healthy with under the kind of care that I have been providing to this orchid. The one thing that I think is kind of a pity is that this orchid, or Tolumnia orchids in general, they do not have fragrance, because otherwise it would just be way too fantastic. You know, the flowers are looking really cute and full of possibilities and varieties. There's so many different varieties of Tolumnias out there. I would even guess that, you know, there are probably more varieties than Phalaenopsis orchid. I don't know. That's a wild guess, but I've seen so many different kinds of Tolumnia orchids. It's almost every time I see someone else's Tolumnia orchid, it's a different name and it's a different photo, different bloom. So I feel that there are just so many possibilities for hybridization and new variety coming out all the time. So and also for Tolumnia to become fully mature, to be able to bloom, it takes a lot less time than it would for a Phalaenopsis orchid, and that's why I think recent years Tolumnia orchid has been getting a lot of traction with orchid hobbyists, because it is much closer to the instant gratification that we're all so accustomed to nowadays. That's a joke, but it just takes less time, so I think Tolumnias will continue to have more new varieties as hybridization goes on. And even though right now I only have 4 Tolumnia orchids in my collection, and I have already said, I know that I think this kind of orchid, I have 4 and that's enough, but I may change my mind in the near future. So far this year I've been pretty good about not buying any more orchid, but if I buy anything at all this year, I think either Tolumnia or Paphiopedilum slipper orchid may be something that I would get, 1 or 2, if I really have the urge to buy more flowers, so that I have something new and some new challenge that I can, I guess, try and share with you guys. I think getting new orchids to try something new or experiment is better, because if my orchids currently are happy and are blooming, why am I doing anything different to potentially risk stressing out the orchid, right? To me, that's not worth it. If it's not broken, I'm not gonna fix it. this is all I have for you today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you would like to get more orchid related videos from my channel, please subscribe and turn on the notification. I want to wish you happy growing, and I will talk to you in my next video. Ciao!